Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Introduction to 3D Printing course or workshop. And this online workshop is brought to you by our parent NGO called Mycelium. And my name is Ankur Shah. I'm the Director of Operations of Mycelium. And Mycelium is this 501c3 nonprofit based in Huntsville, Alabama. And we create a network of knowledge for self-sustainability and circular economy. Our main mission and purpose is to accelerate the circular economy using technological solutions and make them open source. Yeah, so we basically make open source technology. And what is a circular economy, you may ask? So in our current system, we have a linear economy, which means we basically take resources, extract them, make products, and then we dispose them, throw it away. It's either in landfills or burnt. But a circular economy is one in which you take resources, but then you make products and reuse or recycle or repurpose them, so very little resources are then thrown away or misused. So it closes the loop, and it's way more sustainable because the resources we have are finite. Okay, so now we move on to Spore. Yes, Spore is a program by Mycelium, our parent NGO, and it stands for Supporting Public Outreach, Resources, and Education. And we've done several projects. In the bottom left, you can see a picture of a 3D printer, and this is in a library, public library in Cavalry, Alabama, and it's meant for students to use for free. We have taught several classes in person, and because of the pandemic, we've shifted our operations online, of course. Mycelium has also made a recycling corner to repurpose plastic waste and 3D print new products in local university called University of Alabama in Huntsville. And we have several projects coming down the line related to the circular economy. So this class is focused on an introduction to 3D printing. Our teacher today, her name is Jeanette Blasius. She is the director of outreach, and she has years of experience in 3D printing. So this is going to be a really good class, especially for people getting started. So with that, let's welcome Jeanette. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankur. So in today's class, we'll be going over 3D printing in general. What is 3D printing? What types of 3D printers there are? How to get started, setting up your files, and then finally just some last minute send off. So let's get into it. So the main question is, what is a 3D printer? So a 3D printer is in its core is it's a machine that can take a digital 3D model and turn it into a physical object using various materials. So with this application, you are basically taking an entire warehouse and turning it into a box that can just make the parts instead of having to go and get in a forklift and go and find the part. You just have it made right there, right away. Here's a couple of examples of things that we've made. As you can see, I'm big into cosplay and geeky figurines and such. But one of our co-founders, Dan, has put together this robot. You can watch it work a little bit. Dan, if you want to say some words about it.
Yeah, so all these parts are 3D printed except for the motors and the circuitry, but the idea behind this is it's a 3D printed robot that hopefully we can attach a 3D printing pen to, and then it's a 3D printer that can roam around, a mobile 3D printer. So it's one of our projects we're kind of experimenting with.
It's really, really cool. Thank you, Dan. For the cosplaying side, I made this slide just to kind of touch into that, as I know I have a few people that join this class from Dragon Con and other cosplay forums. So when you get into 3D printing for cosplay, what you're usually going to see is you're going to print out a bunch of parts. You're going to paint them. Priming is a big issue. A lot of people at conventions will want no printer lines or just a lot of details. And then if you're able to, putting lights in it is a big 3D printing, and putting lights in cosplay, they go hand in hand. And then once you're done, you can put it together and you paint it. Of course, one of the main things, especially if you have a smaller printer, is having to cut the pieces and put them together. As you can see here, I had someone commission me to print Sephiroth's 8-foot sword. So I had a 8-inch bed, and I had to print it piece by piece and then put it together. It was a fun project. And then there are several materials you can print with that are non-toxic. So you can make, they're safe to wear on your skin. There are a few that are, they're a little, like ABS is popular. That's a plastic that I'll talk about a little bit later. Cosplayers like to use that. I don't think it's really harmful to wear on your skin, but I would not recommend making teeth out of that. And then finally, like there's clear filaments that you can get, and if you put lights in that, you can really show the lights coming through. And then actually I've got one last piece where I printed this and then used heat to kind of mold it. And it was kind of a neat trick to try and learn. You can, it's scary to use heat with 3D printing because the melting point is so small, but there's a lot of just showing that there's a lot of applications, at least in cosplay, that you can use 3D printing with. And then that brings us to our topic of discussion this month, 3D printed home decor. So I'm pretty geeky, so I've got a lot of just stuff like this around my house. I've got Baby Yodas all over the place. I've got storage. I haven't printed this one, but I do have like a lot of cup holders, stuff that I've put in the bathroom to hold soaps, stuff like that you can print storage. Little succulent holders are very popular in 3D printing. There's all kinds of stuff. This one's kind of neat because it's a self-watering one. And then there's also like functional stuff that you can, like this one, I guess you put a tea light in and you can have it as like a little decoration light for your house or Halloween, stuff like that. One of the most popular decorations that I've seen online is this pattern called a Voronoi. And it is this, it's kind of a mathematical pattern that prints in this, it's just like a lot of, it's like a wireframe that just has a random pattern that prints just like this. And I have like a quick how to do this in Blender. Blender is a free program that I'll talk about later too. You just turn it into wireframe and then use the smoothing texture called subdivision surface. But if you look up how to do Voronoi, if you really want to get into this, there's a lot of great tutorials on how to actually create like randomized Voronoi rather than just the wireframe. So it's a really neat thing that 3D printers are really specific at being able to do. A couple of other things that you can customize your own decorations with. If you know how to use Adobe Illustrator or Inkscape or any program that can make SVG files, you can take that and put it into Blender, or I think a lot of CAD programs do it too, is you can change it into a 3D file so you can print a logo or some cool sign to have, words on the wall or something. I've seen a lot of people do this for like keychains and wall art and stuff. And then last, this is something that a lot of people ask me to do. It's very easy to do too. It's in Cura, which is probably the most popular program for 3D printing. You can put a JPEG just straight into the program, and it'll ask you like, how do you want to set this up? And usually the standard is pretty good. So you just put it in there. You have to rotate it, because if you print it flat, it won't look the same. If you print it standing up, the way the lines will be, it'll just look better. So as you can see, I put this JPEG in, and this is what it looks like after it prints, and I put the light through it. It's really, really cool effect. And I've made Christmas ornaments and just window hangers. So some really cool stuff, really cool decorations that you can put around the house or have as gifts and stuff like that with 3D printing. So we can talk about the different kinds of printers. So usually when you hear about 3D printing, you think of the first one. This is this plastic FDM printer. But there's also a liquid printer called an SLA, and then there's this powder printer. There are many types, but these are the three main core ones that people typically have at home. So the first one is the FDM printer. And the way this works is you've got this heated bed that raises up, and then you have these gears and this nozzle that this plastic string called the filament goes into, and then these gears kind of pull the string into this heated block into this heated nozzle and squeezes it out into a pattern, and then the bed raises up, or the nozzle, sorry, and this one, the nozzle goes up. There's several different types of printers. There's Cartesian, which is the one where the bed doesn't raise, and then there's the XYZs where it does. They both work similarly though. So the nozzle goes up, it prints a pattern, it goes up, it prints a pattern, just over and over until you have your model there on your bed to pull and have. So yeah, as you can see in this diagram, that's how the filament goes through. It gets heated and it turns into liquid right about here, and then comes out and immediately cools. So this plastic string, the filament, can be many different types of materials. The most common, of course, is the PLA, the polylactic acid. It's a non-toxic, though biodegradable plastic. It's very simple to use. You don't even have to have a heated bed. The heated bed definitely does help, but it's not required. I definitely recommend using PLA for beginners. Next, like I said earlier, ABS is popular with cosplayers because it's very strong. It's a little bit more heat resistant, so you can have it in the car a little bit more than PLA. PLA, you leave it, especially here in the South, you leave it in the car, you're going to come out and your piece is going to be all warped. So with ABS, it has a little bit more resistance to that. However, it is toxic, just slightly. It puts off an odor. You have to keep it in an enclosure. It has trouble adhering to the bed a little bit more than PLA does. However, there's one cool thing where you can smooth the outside using acetone fumes. So that's another really popular thing that cosplayers like, because it's really easy to get rid of those printer lines. You don't have to use varnish or anything. You just smooth it out using vapors. And then there's kind of a middle ground, PETG. It's non-toxic. It's hard to use like ABS, but it's almost as strong. So if you're wanting something in between those two, PETG is pretty good. I've made several pieces. My famous bone helmet is made out of PETG, and it's been through a lot, and it's survived 2 Dragon Cons, I think, and so it's tough. And then there's some other stuff that you can get. There's nylons, which has a little bit of a flexibility. You've got carbon fiber, which is really strong. PEI is like a rubbery, or sorry, the TPU is the rubbery material. And then there's composites that are like wood infused. You can actually get filament that has wood inside it, and when you're done with it, you can stain it. And then there's some that have iron filings in it, so when you're done, you can spray water on it and it will rust just like a piece. So you have it just weathering. Like if you want something to look aged, it's really easy to make that look authentically like an iron piece of something. Really cool materials. So the next one I'm going to talk about is the stereolithic lithographic printer. It's a liquid printer. It's the same basic principle, except it's flipped upside down. So instead of going from the bottom to the top, this one has this bed that lowers down into this basin of liquid, and either this laser or I have a small one, and it has an LCD screen that will project the entire image all at once. So it projects the image and it raises a little, it projects another image pattern, and then it raises until you have your figure there. I will warn, this one is a little bit harder to work with than the FDM printer, but if you're into miniatures a lot and you're willing to put in the effort, this printer is really cool. I've learned a lot having one of these. So let's watch one kind of in motion. So as you can see, this one sped up, I believe like 4, maybe 5 times. And you just see it just projects it and goes until it's like almost like it's pulling it out of this liquid, because the consistency of the model and the liquid are almost the same. So it really does look like it's just showing up out of nowhere. It's really cool to watch. So here's some pieces that I've made with my little printer. And I'll talk about my printer in a little bit, but so as you can see, this is what it looks like when it comes off of the bed. It looks really clear if you're using clear. I use clear, but it looks really clear, but when you cure it, it kind of thickens a little bit. But like I've got these figurines that I've made. Now you still have to keep in mind overhangs, like stuff that's going to stick out. So you see some of the little blemishes where the supports were, but you can file those down pretty easy. My little teeny tiny baby Yodas that look like gummy bears. But yeah, it's been a learning experience having one of these. It's definitely it's a different way to think than the other printer. And then last, we'll talk about this powder printer. Now this one that they have here is a little bit more of a commercial application. It's this, so you have this basin, or you have a piston in a basin that's full of this powder, and it has this laser that heats it. So as the powder stays a thin, there's a thin layer here, and the laser sears it in a pattern, and then this roller will roll a layer of powder right over it, and then it'll sear that layer, and then it'll roll more, and then it'll put a pattern, and then it'll, and so forth until you have your part. This one is showing like maybe an aluminum powder. So this is usually used for making machine parts or functional prototypes, stuff like that. Businesses usually have these. We have a lot of military and astrophysics stuff in Huntsville, so we have several companies that have these printers for prototyping and such. We can watch it go. This looks like it's printing some sort of machine part. So you can see it put the roll of powder, and then it seared it, and then it puts another layer, and then it keeps going. Sorry, every time someone joins, my thing gets kind of messed up. Try to just get to the end. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So another type of powder printer, it's a little different. It's made in like a plastic powder, but when it puts the powder, it prints on it with an inkjet printer. So this is really popular with like people make these figurines. So you show up and they do a 3D scan. I remember seeing one at DragonCon in the vendor rooms. They had this giant like Lazy Susan that you could stand on in your cosplay, and you make a pose, and they'd spin you on this turntable and scan you as you go, and then you come back in a couple hours and you have this action figure of your cosplay. It's so cool. And so there's a company in our town in Huntsville, Alabama. There's this company where you can show up and have a figure made of you or you and your pets, and it's just really awesome. Like a lot of people are really getting into this. It's really amazing what you can do. As you can see all these people making these different poses, wearing clothes. You could see all like the details in their clothes and everything. Really awesome. And then this photo here in the bottom right is actually a photo from a similar printer that they acquired this at Clemson University. It's obviously it's a lot more high quality printer, powder printer. This is a 3D printed bottle of whiskey, and that just blows my mind. It looks like a bottle of whiskey, but it is entirely printed with powder and ink, and It has no liquid in it. It's very, very, very awesome. Oh, awesome, awesome. Got someone near Clemson. It's a cool school. I've been out there a couple of times. So here's a couple of recommended printers that we recommend. And I've had a lot of people. So this year, obviously, a lot of people stuck at home. 3D printing has gotten huge this last year. So I've had a lot of people ask me, what is a good starting printer? And I always, without hesitation, I say the Creality Ender 3. It is a fantastic starter printer. It's definitely the printer everybody's getting. It's very cheap. It's very easy to use. Creality is a great brand. So yeah, you can get the Creality Ender 3. It's usually an 8-inch bed. You can get them for about, 150 is pushing it. You're probably getting a refurbished if you're getting a 150. 250 is brand new, probably with all the bells and whistles of the lower end ones. They definitely have some higher end ones, some larger ones, so forth. And then next is their bigger brand, I suppose. I have this one. I have the Creality and CR10S. It is a workhorse. I have been using this printer for over a year, and it just goes and goes and goes, and I never have hardly any failure. All the failures are usually on my end. So I recommend, if you're willing to go a little bit more higher on the price point and get a larger bed, mine is 1 foot by 1 foot. So if you're willing to pay a little more and get a little bit more, I recommend the CR10 series. For the SLA printer that I talked about earlier, my SLA printer is the longer orange 10. I got it for about, I think it was actually 135, but I think they've gone down a little bit. So you get exactly this. I don't think it comes with the resin anymore, but you get this printer, and it's pretty good. It's 3-inch by 5, I believe, but for miniatures, that's perfect. So it comes with this box over it that kind of keeps the sunlight out of it and kind of keeps it smells. I'll warn you, using an SLA printer, it stinks. It smells really bad. It's just this resin, it's got like a plasticky smell to it. So I recommend, if you do get one, put it in a large room, or in the garage or something, so you can kind of fumigate a little bit or have a vent or something. And last, I recommend the Prusa MK3 series. These printers cost a little bit more, but they are very high quality. They usually have a lot of features that the other printers don't have. They started the flexible bed. I believe Creality started doing that, but they have the dual filament. This one pictured here is a dual filament. So how that works is your file can have 2 different colors, and so it'll print. It prints separately, but it'll put like orange here and black here, and then it'll kind of, as it prints it, it puts the 2 colors where they need to go. So yeah, actually, I think if someone's asking about the pricing, I've got a little diagram here on that. So a standard roll of filament is about $20 for a kilogram. I use a kilo. When I'm really getting into printing, I use about a whole roll a month, and that's like with a lot of printing. So you can get them a little cheaper. I think I bought some $18 a roll. If you want to get something a little fancier, there's like the silk gold or silk silver that I've gotten that is about $25. It just depends on what kind you're getting. I don't recommend getting like the low end stuff. Like, actually, this roll I'm holding here is Monoprice brand, and it is bad. I do not recommend this filament right here. It doesn't stick really well. That's one thing that to keep in mind. If you're having trouble printing, don't blame the printer. It could also be the filament. So if you have a second brand of filament or something like that, it's worth a shot before you send an angry email back to Creality. And then resin. Resin comes in a bottle of liquid. I've got translucent and red, which is also translucent. And then I recently got blue, and they were all about $20 for, this is a half kilogram And that's a lot of printing for a 3-inch by 5-inch bed, making miniatures. That lasts me a long time. I had bought this one bottle about a year ago, actually. I think I bought my longer in March of last year, and it's just now starting to run out. So you can print a good bit of stuff. So I don't recommend like stocking up on every color because it's quite expensive to just buy one bottle, but it does last quite a while. And you can get it in smaller quantities, but so let's move on to how to get started. So when you have your printer or you have access to a printer, you're going to want to get your file ready to print. And how do you do that? Well, first you have to find your model. So there's a lot of resources on where to find a model if you aren't savvy with modeling on from scratch or anything. You can find it. My typical go-to is Thingiverse. Thingiverse is great. It's got a huge database. The way they've got the organization of the files is really good. They usually have the thumbnail, and then they have several pictures inside, and then you can visualize the model if you click on it. I also like My Mini Factory, especially for SLA, for liquid printer models. They have a lot of stuff for liquid printer stuff in My Mini Factory. They have one thing that Thingiverse doesn't have. They require that the model is printed before they allow it to be posted to their website. So Thingiverse has a lot of stuff that is unfinished, or they're just not good files. They're just you pull them and they have holes everywhere, or they just don't make any sense. Where My Mini Factory, it has to be ready to print. And then also there, if you have something really obscure, there's this place called Yegi.com, which is basically like the Google for finding models. It pulls Thingiverse, it pulls My Mini Factory. It also pulls from sites that you have to pay to buy the model, which I forgot to mention. My Mini Factory does have pay models, but they're not exclusive to that. And they're usually not much. It's usually only a couple of dollars, where Yegi will pull from sites where it's like professionally made models and such. So you have to, if you're really looking for something obscure, you can usually try there. Or if you're looking for something a little bit more artistic, there's Sketchfab. Some of those models are for download. I've downloaded something. I think when Deltarune first came out, I downloaded a model from there because no one had made anything on the other sites, and someone had made one on Sketchfab that I was able to pull and fix for printing. Yeah, Sketchfab won't have stuff that's ready to print typically, because those models are typically not intended for 3D print. They're usually for games and just for looking nice and stuff like that. And then also I've pulled some from Google Earth, which is neat because I've pulled buildings from Huntsville and printed them for friends and family, just to have like a piece of home. Really, really neat. So if you do decide to make your model, there's a couple of ways. There's two different types of 3D modeling. There's CAD, which is more of a mathematical, very precise type of modeling. And then there's also just 3D modeling, which is like shaping clay. You can be precise, you can make measurements and such, but as you can see, the applications are typically a lot different depending on which kind you're going to do. So we have a couple of programs that you can do your own CAD. So this is a program. Orchard 3D, 3dorchard.com is a website that our co-founder Dan helped start up. Dan, do you want to talk a moment about Orchard?
Sure. So basically the goal with this website was to give the internet the tools engineers use to build the world around us. And with these tools, you happen to be able to make precise 3D models that can be 3D printed. And so unlike 3D modeling, where it's kind of like modeling with clay, you can imagine how difficult it would be to sculpt a engine out of clay. These kind of tools are for the precise work. So on 3D Orchard, you don't have to download anything. It runs right in your browser. You can just sketch 2D drawings, like let's say you sketch a 2D circle, you can then pull it out into a three-dimensional cylinder, for example. And so you can use precise dimensions and constraints, things like that, and it's fully free. So check it out. It's a little bit clunky, to be honest, right now, but we're working on it. So that's just one free tool for you guys.
Yeah, it's a really simple modeling. I use it to make, like I've made my crock pot. The knob on my crock pot went out and got lost or broken something, and so I just came here and I made a circle and extended it and put a peg and extended it, and then I fit right on there. Really, really neat application. Then there's a program that I like to use. This is a blender3d.org. This is more the modeling side of things, though it has a lot of applications. What Blender is it's a program that does 3D modeling. It does video editing. It does now they have ZBrush integrated in it. And one of of course, my favorite thing is that it's free and it's open source, so it's continuously improving. You can get lots of mods for it. And stuff like that. And one of my favorite things that they do every year, they do a film festival where they have everyone submit a video focusing on one thing. So like they had a year where they focused on hair physics, and so everyone submitted movies that focused on like really crazy hair and like movement and just wind and textures using hair and hair physics. And at the end of the year, they showcased it, they gave awards, and then they said, okay, that was cool. Let's make hair physics better because of this, because in this movie we kind of didn't do this. And so then the next year they'll pick lighting or such and such. And so every year it just gets better and better because they'll push the limits with this film festivals. And I think that is so awesome that they do that. And actually there's a couple of game studios that have been using Blender, specifically I believe it's Ubisoft uses Blender exclusively. I wouldn't say exclusively at this point, but they do use Blender quite a bit in some of their games, and they advertise it on their site, and they're proud of it because it's cool to see that there's a game company that uses a program that anyone can use. Anyone can make games using this software. So if you're wanting to get into modeling, I recommend checking this one out too. Oops. Sorry about that. All right. Setting your print up. So once you have your file, you have to change it into this file format that your printer is able to read. So usually your printer came with like a little disk or a chip that has the software included. Most of the time, I think they come with Cura, or they recommend Cura, or I recommend Cura because it's free. It gets better and better all the time. Excuse me, and it has a lot of extra features that you can add to it. So how your model works is you put your model in this software, this slicing software, and it literally slices up your model into what we like to say, like it comes in pancakes, in these layers of pattern. So it knows, okay, these layers are like this. So yeah, like I said earlier, there's many different softwares you can use. Cura, it looks about like this. This is the preview mode. You can see all the different types of the model. There's the certain colors for the outside, certain colors for the inside, and then certain colors for like support material. And then there's also another program I recommend trying out, Mesh Mixer, which has this kind of support, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But this type of support, it uses very little material to print. It kind of saves on time. It kind of saves on having these rough edges where they touch and so forth. Then there's also Simplify 3D, which is a paid service. I don't have it, but like I think Dan has it and he recommends it. But it's like 175. But everyone I know that has gotten that software, they recommend it. They say it's worth it. So if you're really wanting to play around with slicing and more capabilities, I recommend looking into that. And then last, there's Slicer, which is more of a file editor. The file type is called a G-code. And Slicer lets you change your G-code to customize where the nozzle goes. I actually, when I first got my printer, I did something really cool. I downloaded this G-code, which I don't recommend doing, but I downloaded a G-code that was specific for my printer, and I ran it. And what it did is it moved the motors in a certain pattern. So it played The Entertainer, or I had one that played the Star Wars theme song, using my printer's motors, like the sound that the motors make, just moved in just certain patterns that it made the sound. It was really neat. I would have no idea how to do that on my own, but someone was able to do it in this slicing program, just modifying the G-code and telling the motor where to go. So it's just a little visualization. So you have your model, you change it to this G-code, and then you have your 3D print. So at a first glance, when you put your model in, you'll have all these different modifiers that you can change. So you can change where it's at on the bed, you can resize it, you can rotate it, you can mirror it. They have a few more features that they've added that you can play around with. I believe you can add more if you go into the settings. So one of the most important things is knowing the different sides and how to set up your model. So infill is how the inside is going to print. So you can choose, and they have different, at least in Cura, they have different types of patterns that you can put. I'm sure every slicing program has different patterns you can choose. So the standard is usually 20%. I typically run mine lower. I run it at 7%, since I'm usually just making figurines and such. But to trade that off, I kind of make my top layers and my outer shell a little bit thicker. So I have less infill, but I have thicker walls. So it kind of trades that off, that structure, but then also kind of gives me more time. That's one key thing, is how long do you want to wait for your print? How long do you want to run your printer? How much material you want to use? So sure, you could print it 100%, but it's going to take a long time. So you're wanting to try and find that balance of what you really need it for. And all these settings can be changed in the slicing program. Another thing to keep in mind is your print quality, or it's also your layer height. So here's 3 different settings for layer heights. Typically, I think the middle ground is 0.2 millimeters. So that is the space between one layer and the next, between the patterns that the printer is going to print out. So you can go a little bit less. However, you're going to trade off quality, like how it's going to look. You're going to have like really rough lines on the outside. You're also going to kind of sacrifice some integrity. So if you've got a piece that's going to have any kind of push on it, then you're going to want to go a little bit thicker. Now, if you're wanting to print something that looks really fantastic, you can go with the 0.05 millimeter. But as you can see, this is the same model put in the bed. So at 0.05, it's going to take almost 7 hours. But then at 0.2, it's only going to take an hour and a half. So are you going to want this to run overnight, or you want it like in a couple hours? And then if you really want to save time, you can try to go less. However, if you go even less than this, I don't recommend going less than 0.3. I've gone 0.4, and it was scary. It will, what is called delaminate, where the layers will come apart, and that's not good. So when you start using Cura, it has this basic menu. So you've got your layer height, and actually the same slider for layer height is your print speed. So it kind of gives you that visualization of, okay, you can keep going with layer height, but it's going to go slower or faster. And then you can change your infill, and then generate supports is, they just have a check mark here where you could turn it off and on. And then build plate adhesion. I don't recommend this in this mode. because the build plate adhesion it's going to give you is basically a giant pillow of plastic that your print's going to sit on. And I don't really like that. It's unless you're having some serious bed issues, like actual adhesion issues, I don't recommend doing that. This is just the basic menu. There is a custom where you can change everything, which I recommend. This is just to kind of put your toe in and get familiarized with it. But once you're comfortable with that, I recommend going to the custom and actually learn all the different types and changing it. It has a pretty good set standard on most printers. Usually it has a profile for your printer listed, or you can Google it and find your printer settings. So as I said before, this is the build plate adhesion. And if you go into the custom menu, you have several different options. Of course, you have the option for none. And then you also have the option for what's called a skirt. And this is what I like to use. So it's basically, it just kind of puts a few rings of plastic around your model, and then it gets going. So it kind of gets the plastic flowing, and then it just goes, it just goes from there. Then there's also a brim, which I recommend doing if you're making something really tall, especially if you have the Cartesian type printer that goes back and forth constantly. So it kind of anchors it to the bed. For something like this, you kind of don't need it, but on something that's like really doesn't touch the bed a lot and it's really tall, I recommend putting some sort of brim on there. And then as I was saying before about the type I don't like, this is the raft. It's like the brim, except it goes all the way under the model. It's like 3 or 4 layers of just solid plastic. And it makes sure your print prints, but it is, if you've got pretty good adhesion, you really don't need this. This is really not necessary. Okay, so this is a really, really important part. So I mentioned earlier something about supports, and what supports are. They are these bits of plastic that your slicing program will automatically add to compensate for what's called overhangs. So in printing, you have this sort of 45-degree rule where if you print it at a 45-degree angle, or it can be even less. You can test this with your printer, but typically 45. So basically, it's where one layer sits here, and then another layer just kind of touches like right here, and then the next one just kind of touches here. So you can actually get away with not putting supports there because it has one layer touching the next. However, if you go without, you're going to kind of have what we call the spaghetti mess, where the plastic didn't have anything to stick to. So it just kind of made a mess. It kind of started to build up, and then it kind of almost, and then it finally gets there, but you've got this failure, and there's really no way to fix this unless you just reprint it and try to glue it on there or something. Or you can set to have supports added, and it will print this support material under there. The trade-off though is that it adds time, it adds material, it adds this gritty layer where the material was and you pulled it off. Now there are some cool things you can get, like I said there were dual filament printers. You can get it so it prints that in a dissolvable material. I've seen where that you can do that, stuff like that. Or you can have like the supports that I showed with the other program, Mesh Mixer. It has like these they're called tree supports. So they just kind of crawl up here, and then like right about here, they'll break away and kind of hold on to it. And then when you pick them off, they're actually pretty fun to pick off because they're just like little like veins or trees that you just kind of pick off, and they barely leave any kind of residue. So if you're worried about that, I recommend looking into Mesh Mixer because it's really, really neat to watch them print, honestly, and fun to see them work. And then kind of like a last point is when you put your print on the bed and you're just about to hit save file, I recommend going to this preview menu. I believe all slicing programs will have this preview menu. So it's just to make sure that the model is going to print. Like if there's a hole if the model has any kind of holes in it, it will just not print that layer, and it'll be bad. You'll have a mess when you come back to check on your printer. It's just going to be a mess. So always check your print. Also overhangs, you can check for overhangs, that sort of thing. So this slider will actually show you, kind of simulate what your print is going to look like in real time, and build it as it goes. So always check your print. I definitely recommend that. And this is kind of an optional thing. If you have a printer like the ones I've had, they don't really give you like a thumbnail or anything. It's just the name. And so when I save my file, I typically like to put the print time, the profile, since I have several printers, and then the name of it, of course. And then sometimes I'll put the material or different size or what temperatures, settings, that stuff like that. That way, when I go to my print, at least my favorite thing is the print time, because then I'm like, well, I've got to go to work in like 4 hours. Well, don't have time to really print that unless I just do it, and then it just stays on for the 9 hours while I'm gone. So let me print something just like for a couple hours. So I definitely recommend thinking about some sort of naming convention for your files if you have a printer like that. And then the last chapter is just to kind of talk about some tips, and getting started for real. So here's my printer. As you can see, I've got my filament spool. It's got a little thing that comes off of the box that holds it. And then the filament kind of comes through, goes into this. This one actually has 2 extruders. So it goes into these gears, and it goes into this this tube. It kind of loop-de-loos around and then goes straight into the hot end, or the print head, whatever you want to call it, and into the print. So then you've got your secondary extruder, print head. The PTFE tube is the little tube on this one. I believe the Creality Under 3 also has this tube. They'll all have like one of those on the inside, but then this one, it has it on the outside. So the different materials will have different temperature settings. Typically, your printer will come with a PLA and an ABS standard setting. These settings can also be set up in the GCODE. That's actually what the printer will go after. This is just to preheat to get your printer started. But if you have particular settings that you want to use, it's going to resort whatever the GCODE says, but when setting the print up, it's going to go to this. So these are the standard settings for using PLA. So it's usually 190 to 210, it depends on the types. Like I have a filament that it kind of worked better at a higher temp, so I put it at 200. And my bed, I keep it at 60. And then ABS requires higher temperatures, as well as an enclosure if you're going to be using ABS. But it requires a higher temperature. It has to be very, very standard. It has to stay at the same temperature, and the bed has to be a lot hotter. Same with, if you're running with PETG, you're typically going to run it in the ABS setting as well, but it does not need an enclosure. Then getting to know how to level your bed is probably the most frustrating thing as a beginner. I remember when I got my first printer, I struggled with this. So your printer will have a home or a leveling or something like that, and basically you just kind of go with, it has to have like you take a sheet of paper and you can just barely run it through, then that means you've got your printer set up perfectly. Or you can be lazy like me and get an auto level sensor, which I believe the Creality 3s can, or the Ender series can, the CR10 can, I believe Prusa can probably do it too. Set up an auto leveling sensor. So basically I let it heat up, I come back after a minute or two, I hit level bed, and it kind of goes on 9 points on the bed, and then goes back to home, and it's good to go. And those are typically, I think I got a kit and it was like 85, but I think you can get them cheaper. I think you can usually get them for about 50, depending on the type you get. Here's just some tips. So your printer usually come with some tools. Mine came with some snips for taking supports or blemishes, stuff like that. Then a scraper is really great. You spend all that time trying to get your print to stick to the bed. Now you have to pull it off. Having a scraper with a really thin edge is fantastic, getting it off. And then Not extra nozzles. They're inexpensive. They're usually a couple of dollars just to get some extra nozzles. It's always awful when you've got some sort of project you're working on or doing a commission for someone and your nozzle just clogs or breaks or something. And then you have to wait for it to come in from Amazon or whatever. And so it's good to just have them on hand because they're pretty easy to get. And then one thing that's really exciting about a printer is being able to print your own upgrades. Like there's nothing better than the sense of I don't have to buy anything. I can just make it to make it better. So this shown here is a filament cleaner box. It's just a simple box with a piece of foam in it. And so as it goes into the printer, it cleans it of cat hair or lint, any kind of moisture. It's recommended to have one of these, especially if you have pets. It helps me a lot. I have cats, so I open this up and it's usually got quite a bit of cat hair in there. Running out of filament is bad news. There's nothing worse than coming in and finding out that your print stopped or your print is still printing because it thinks it has filament and it actually doesn't. My printer has an auto sensor to tell if it's run out of filament. It doesn't work, so I've actually pulled it off my printer or it just doesn't work. It's just not functioning for that. It continuously tells me I'm out of filament, so it's just making sure that you just don't run out is pretty simple. And then if you have trouble with your print sticking to the bed, glue stick. Glue stick number one, hairspray if you've got it. I don't like using it because it makes my office stink, but I've got hairspray for just when I'm really frustrated and I just want to shoot it with hairspray. So I recommend that, especially if you've got a glass bed. It'll depend on the type of bed you have. Sometimes you can clean it with alcohol, especially if you're using, I think PEI sheets you used to use alcohol, but yeah, it's typically glue stick is a go-to. And that's for any material. So with that, that's the end of the class. So thank you for coming. I hope everyone learned something. Now we'll open the room up to questions and comments. So you can unmute and ask me your questions.
Yeah, everyone, feel free to ask questions. Many of you asked in the chat, and I hope they're answered, but please feel free to ask questions.
Awesome. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Meredith. We really appreciate it.
Jeanette, we had one question about filament storage. Can you go through that a little bit, like storing PLA?
Yeah, hang on. Let's see. Let me turn this off and I can show you. So let's see. I've actually got it's called a dry box. So it's this Tupperware. It's not, mine is not airtight, but I have this this giant Tupperware that has all my filament storage, and I have those, those packets of silica gel. I've got, this thing is just full of these silica gel packets that I've gotten from people collecting at work and stuff. And then I've also got like a string of Christmas lights that I can turn on, and it kind of heats the inside, but you can get little warmers. It just depends. It's lots of different kinds of dry boxes that you can make. But just having any kind of storage for your filament is a good idea, because if any kind of moisture gets to your filament, it becomes really brittle. So you have to be really careful with letting it get especially like we live in the South, so it gets quite humid here. So you have to be careful of stuff like that. Now, if your filament does get any kind of moisture, you can try to put it in the oven. Or I think I saw someone say something about using a dehydrator. I saw something about that. I believe you can do that. I've heard of people doing that. Or just try to if you just kind of you bend it just a little bit, it'll break, and that's really frustrating because then when it's going in the printer, it'll break, and then you'll have a failure because it's run out of it's technically run out of filament. So yeah, keep filament storage is really important, especially if you're going to keep a lot of different types of filament. So yeah. Yeah, the raft is, I was using the raft on my first printer, but yeah, it's just a waste of time and material when you can just stick to a skirt just to make sure. Like once it like I kind of stick around and I'll watch it print the skirt, and then I'm like, okay, well I can go check out and come back. So it's definitely worth trying the other types. One other thing I guess that reminds me is I recommend getting like, I don't know if I can, I'll just unplug it. I recommend getting like just a little webcam to watch your print, especially if you're going to leave your printer, if you're going to leave the house. I recommend doing that. Or you can even go further. There's stuff like, I think Octoprint. There's different types of things you can get to kind of take control of your printer while you're not home. So yeah, at least being able to keep an eye on it is nice, especially like when I'm lazy and I'm sitting on the couch and I'm like, I wonder if my print's failed, and I can log in. I'm like, I don't see filament coming out, so I get up and I go and check on it, instead of just assuming that it's working. It's also nice to be able to spy on my pets when I'm not home. So um, I recommend it. You can usually get one for about 20-30 bucks. And then there's got some really cool ones that you can take video of time lapse, which is also cool. They have the ones where it'll take a video, it'll only record while it's actually printing. So it looks like the print is just growing. So it'll print and then it'll move away and it'll take a photo and then it'll print. And it takes a long time, but when you put the video together and it just watch this print just kind of make itself, it's really, really cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you,
Chris
Meredith.
had a great question. Dan addressed it, but if Jeanette, if you have any thoughts, is there an eco-friendly way to discard excess, and what would you do with the waste, please?
I have a big bag of excess filament. Oh, yeah, so there. So yeah, I collect it, and hopefully I can get to our recycling station. It's unfortunately we set it up in February of last year, so I didn't even get to go visit it before everything shut down. So it's currently sitting at a university, and so I'm hoping one of these days I can go there and turn all my recycled filament into new filament, or at least usable filament. I don't expect it to be 100% again. I've heard it can get brittle. I've just been keeping it in a grocery bag, so it's probably got humidity to it or who knows what. So yeah. So,
Yeah, to add to that, I guess the answer is right now you can't physically recycle it at a local recycling plant, but you can recycle it at home. There are tools like the Fill-A-Struter and Fill-A-Winder.
yeah.
Together, I think it's about 300 bucks, but you can get those, and actually, if you have a ability to grind up your old prints into little plastic bits, that Fill-A-Struter will actually melt it down into new filament that you can reuse.
Yeah.
So the more circular approach.
Yeah, well, and one thing to also add is I use PLA. I typically I have like one roll of PETG, and PLA is biodegradable. So I mean, it's just you could, I don't know how quickly, but it does get brittle if you leave it outside. So eventually it probably become powder again. Yeah. So and it's non-toxic. So I mean, I buy white. You could probably, if you really wanted to be eco-friendly, clear would probably be the best because then won't have ink in it. But yeah, I think there's a way to at least you're not buying ABS, which is toxic. Um,
Chris says they're wanting to cosplay, and
yeah,
would making armor out of it be fine?
yeah. So Like I said, I've got that helmet. I've made several pieces. I don't know if I have anything straight away. I've got a piece here. Well, it's broken, but I made a mask. It was a Hab Hogan from Twerp mask that I had made, and it's pretty. It was fairly strong. I made it hastily. I made it pretty thin, but one thing I said earlier, like PLA melts quickly. So yeah, leaving it in your car is very, very bad. I'm always terrified. Like we always stop at Cracker Barrel on the way. I think coming from Dragon Con, and like the whole time I was like panicking, like we have to go. It's like it's hot out there, and like all my stuff, I'm gonna just have to bring it in into Cracker Barrel. Bring my dragon helmet and my death hammer and all that stuff. So it's you have to be very conscious. Like I made a staff from How to Train Your Dragon for a woman, and I left it in the car for about 30 minutes in November, thinking it would be okay, and I came back and it was absolutely just whoop. I had to remake it for her because I just could not. I could not fix it, and so it's a real bummer if you find out that some heat has gotten to it. So yeah, it's strong enough to wear. If you're going to, yeah, if you're, I don't really think that just walking around with it would be too bad. I have had like hot glue melt off of me before, but I don't think I've ever had any real warping um, from pieces that I printed. And I think the bigger thing is just like the structure. Like I made some claws out of 3D print, and they have a potential for breaking. But as far as like armor pieces, if it's always good to go thicker if you're gonna try to do it. Um, yeah. So now the part about making armor is you're probably going to want to put varnishes on it. So you could probably use like acrylics. Acrylics are fairly, I mean, they're non-toxic. I'm not sure about recyclability, but they would certainly be better than using some of the more caustic varnishes, like some of the resins and stuff. Like I know Smooth On makes some 3D printing resins that people use on their stuff that does a really good job of smoothing it out. But yeah, I'm not sure how biodegradable that would be. But you could probably use some water-based types of varnishes and stuff, and it would probably be a little bit more eco-friendly with painting and stuff. So yeah, I would definitely go thicker with your pieces. The bone helmet that I keep bringing up, it actually has broken a couple of times, and with PETG, it's very hard to repair. I even used 2-part JB Weld epoxy, and it still would not stick together. Ended up using a 3D pen to kind of sew it together, and it actually did really good. But it's still like I still had to repaint it, and it was kind of a pain. But I have regrets that I didn't make it thicker. So,
Awesome.
do you have any more questions?
Sweet guys. Yeah, if you have any more questions,
but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to help.
Yeah, otherwise, at any time you can reach us at contact@sporthsv.org. Dan put the email in.
Yep.
And if you really enjoyed this, we are doing all these classes for free. We'll keep doing them every month. We'll email you with the resources. And if you feel inclined, I pasted a donation link in the chat as well if you feel inclined. So thank you so much for watching this. I hope it was helpful. Jeanette, thank you. That was really, really informative. I just got my first 3D printer as well, so I'm definitely going to be going back to watching the class to print it. So thank you. Enjoy. We'll reach out soon, and have an awesome day.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.